because my parents' Wi-Fi. All right, 3, 2, 1. We're live.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. We have Clarence from the spotter up in the tower, and he is saying we are now 3 wide. Welcome to 3 wide. I'm Rick. I'm joined tonight by Anthony. There he is.
Hello.
And Peter is with us.
How's everybody doing?
Peter's kind of joining us remotely again for this week, but nevertheless, we're excited about his contributions to what promises to be a terrific session for all of you NASCAR fans out there. This is, again, 3 wide. We are delighted to have you with us, honored to have you with us. And Anthony, I know that there's a lot to talk about tonight.
Absolutely.
Peter, we are a half a week away from Talladega. So some of the topics we're going to talk about tonight are indeed racing this week at NASCAR's biggest track. A little bit about one of the podcasts that we had a chance to read the articles on from earlier this week. Some interesting dialogue from NASCAR's president, Steve Phelps, regarding the state of NASCAR, the tracks, the future of NASCAR coming up towards 2021, and a very interesting discussion regarding the NASCAR fan base. So with that, I am looking at a wonderful opportunity for a big crowd this weekend at Talladega. Talladega, as you know, is NASCAR's largest track at 2.66 miles. It has a total capacity, including the one and only infield, and there's not quite anything like the Talladega experience, including the grandstand of 80,000. Talladega will hold about 175,000, and it should be interesting to see just how much of the grandstand is filled, how full the infield is, because once again, NASCAR appears to be in good shape weather-wise. The latest weather for Sunday for the Cup race is 80, sunny, a few clouds, and just about a 10% chance of rain, which in east central Alabama at the end of April really is a blessing, because the weather can be quite bad there at this time of year. So a lot to look forward to. We're going to talk a little bit about how the new package is going to impact the racing at Talladega. We'll talk a bit about the drivers we think are the drivers to watch, teams to watch, and a little bit about, just what usually ends up being the single most exciting race on the calendar for the obvious reasons of the racing down there at Talladega. So, Anthony and Peter, let's talk a little bit about the new package and the impact on racing this weekend.
I think we're going to see, for the first half of the race, I think we're probably going to see one of the more exciting Talladega races, at least during the first stage. This will probably be at the green flag is probably when we're going to see the most cars together on a track. I don't think during practice we're going to see more than a 10, maybe 15 car pack, or even if they can stay in a pack, I'm not too sure. A lot of the racing simulations that have been done on software that's been posted to Facebook, Reddit, shows that the cars can run in a pack, but it seems like it takes way more patience to stay in that pack because of how easy it is to get a run. And if you can hook up with another driver or another 2 drivers, it seems like it can be a throwback to the tandem racing that we saw a few years ago, but with more than 2 or 3 cars, but without the need to switch from overheating. It doesn't look like they have to be glued to the bumper. It looks like they need the patience and they need the 4-car train, and you're going to be able to see some cars pull away, which makes me think that towards the end of the race, we're going to see 2 different dynamics. We're going to see chaos in the beginning. We're going to see it calm down, and then I think we'll see the same chaos towards the end. But But I think at some point during the race, I think you're going to see the cars get quite spread out. A little throwback to the '80s before the restrictor plates really got into effect. You're going to see a lot of drivers in that stage too. I think get a little patient, not get scared, but get a dose of reality to how much this package really has changed Talladega racing. So I think you're going to see a lot of patience. The drivers are going to spread out, and then I think at the start of that third stage, it's going to be every man for himself. The only alliances I think you're going to see are team alliances or manufacturer alliances, but with a much more extreme window for passing. I don't think we're going to see Daytona or Talladega from the last 2 years where you're going to be able to run the high line and that's it. I think you're going to be seeing drivers that are going to be able to fall back on that high line and get a freight train of momentum behind them. And I think you're going to see a lot of slingshot passing, which I think is going to be what is the main culprit to what will inevitably, I feel, be the big one. I think that's going to be somebody misjudging the closing rate, and I think that's my guess for the cause of the wreck. It's not going to be impatience or somebody making a wrong block, which a lot of people are talking about on the radio. I think it's going to be the closing rate of these cars and somebody misjudging that.
I'd like to go back to the package. I don't know about you guys, but I feel really excited for this, honestly. Feel like there's something new in the air. I kind of had this feeling last year when they rolled out that All-Star package. We got to see it for the first time in those open races, and then in the All-Star race last year with the race spoiler and the aero ducts. I'm interested to see what this is like. I can honestly tell you I wasn't around to remember a time where super speedways didn't have a restrictor plate. So this is going to be new and fresh for me. Interested to see how that really tall spoiler is going to affect these cars. And I know that top is transparent, but I feel like that's got to get into the vision of some of those drivers mirror driving like they normally do. They're going to have to rely on their spotters more than ever before, I feel like, especially going from how they raced at Daytona in February to what we're looking at now. And going back to what Anthony said about the tandem possibly returning with this package, seems like there's going to be a lot of drag on these cars. And I'm interested to see if they have those rear bumper extenders. I'm not too sure if that's part of the package that's being rolled out that we've seen at the super speedways, where the cars literally look like the bottom of the car is almost touching the pavement of the racetrack. But I'm interested to see who's going to be those guys if they do it in practice or if they do it out in qualifying. Who's going to be the guys that hook up? How long can they push? And how the handling is going to be like once you're in behind another car, or if you're leading out front, if the cars do, like Anthony said, kind of get spaced out a little bit, like those 80s days where you saw who had the motor and who could really kind of charge and separate themselves. And speaking on the last part, I'm pretty excited for qualifying too. Just thinking about essentially unrestricted engines running for it. I want to see who builds the best motors. Maybe that's going to be a lot that factors into the qualifying as well. So feel it's new, it's fresh. As Rick said before, it got beautiful weather down there. I wish I was going myself, but I got to be back to school the next day. But it should be exciting. And I think right where we are right now with two teams, winning most of the races so far, we can use a bit of excitement. And I think this is going to be a great race.
Picking up on the issue of no restrictor plate, and just the engines themselves. Do you see any potential for engine failures throughout the race in terms of just how hard these engines are going to be pushed? Do you see that becoming an issue similar to a few years ago? We saw that happen, almost sequentially with some of the Toyota engines until Toyota Racing Development got a little bit more proficient in the way they were building engines. Do you see that happening with this kind of stripped engine that doesn't have that plate in there restricting the power and the horsepower of the engine?
I don't know. Remember, Toyota got a lot of help with their engine department by getting that tapered spacer put onto the engine to begin with. Apparently, that was a move that I guess either they asked for or that NASCAR implemented because of how many motors were being blown. So this package, I don't know if it's going to be that detrimental to any of the engines. I think a lot of engineers say that what hurts a motor the most is the variations in RPMs. And these cars are going to be tuned to run right at that optimal RPM range. They're going to know from testing. There was a lot of teams after the 500 that ran the test the following 2 or 3 days. They know what RPM range those motors are going to be running. They know how to program it for that. I think the biggest thing you're going to see is when the cars really do get together, because I think Kyle Larson alluded to it after the 500 testing, and he said that we ran together, but we didn't run close. We didn't run big packs together. I think the dynamic's going to change in practice, where you see they're going to be worried about temperature changes in the motors, being in a much bigger air wake, not being able to keep clean air going through the radiators. I think that's where it's going to become dangerous. We even saw things like that at Bristol, where guys were losing power steering because they had a little too much tape on the motor. They were overheating. So I don't think we're going to see failures from the big guys. I don't think Joe Gibbs or Hendrick or Ganassi or SHR are going to have any failures or catastrophic failures where you're going to see 2 or 3 cars from the same team have the same issue. But I think maybe from the smaller teams that are trying to squeak a little bit more out of the motor might have that issue at some point.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably unlikely as well. Correct me if I'm wrong. I still think we're running that either 550 to 750 horsepower range that we've been used to running. And also, even though I said before unrestricted engines and whatnot, I still think even though the restrictor plate is gone, that these engines still have some type of tapered spacer, which acts in a similar way to a restrictor plate. So I think the safe way to say would be that they'll probably hold up okay. And just as Anthony alluded to with the practice, I think they'll be all right. But you never know. You never know.
It is the 550 motor with the tapered spacer. So it's the 750 motor tapered down to 550.
Any aero ducts on the car?
I don't believe so. I think the only thing that changed from the 500 is the motor, and I think they changed something with the splitter and the spoiler height.
Yeah,
I don't think there's ducts inside the car. I think they're running a 6 or an 8-inch at Talladega. I think during the 500 they ran last year's like 3 or 2 1/4 inch spoiler. So they're running this year's spoiler with last year's splitter, and then the 550 tapered.
Oh wow, interesting.
So does for folks like the three of us and our friends in Chase Elliott Nation, does Chevrolet find speed this week? Is this really finally the week where you've got the plate off, you've got a fast track, you've got great weather? Is this the week where Chevrolet finds its speed?
I mean, they gotta. I would think that. I would think that if you look back to how they ran at Daytona, with Hendrick Motorsports put in all of those cars up front, I think that this is the time and place to really go for it. See if you can get those cars out front, make something happen. And as we've heard many times before, Talladega can be the great equalizer. Matt DiBenedetto at Daytona was leading that race. I mean, even though he's in a Toyota right now, I mean, who knows, a JTG car, an RCR car, they can get up there. What I think is if Hendrick can replicate or come close to what they did in qualifying, where they're close together, if this package allows them to hook up and try to distance themselves, I can see them trying to do what Stewart-Haas did at Talladega in the fall and trying to run the show and dictate based off of blocking and track position, trying to get that elusive win that Chevrolet hasn't been able to find.
I tend to agree with that. I think in qualifying is where you need to see where the speed's going to be. I tend to usually believe and follow the theory of Talladega is a great big equalizer with the draft. If we can see cars stay somewhat together and be able to use the draft, I don't think you can judge if Chevrolet wins on Sunday. I don't think you could say, yeah, they got the power back. just because there's so much more to a race at Talladega than just pure horsepower. If you're a single car team that's struggling for sponsorship, I think it will show just like it usually does at a restrictor plate race where you're struggling to keep up with the draft. But a race package like this, where that taper spacer is essentially just as much of an equalizer as a restrictor plate in a way, I don't know if you're going to see one manufacturer or one team just blow everybody out of the water come race day. I think in qualifying, like we've seen in the past with Hendrick horsepower, taking a lot of the poles over the last 2 or 3 years, sweeping the first 4 positions for Daytona 500 qualifying. I think that's where it'll be obvious if they have the power. But come Sunday, I never believe in that horsepower is always going to guarantee you, or not guarantee you, but always going to play into your odds. It does help, but there's a lot of other factors at Talladega that are going to come and play into it, because even if a Chevrolet wins, if half the Toyotas are out, they're going to have the excuse of there was no competition. And we got to remember the Fords the last 2 or 3 years were shaped like a bullet, and they're shaped pretty similar this year. So I wouldn't be surprised if they have somewhat of an aero advantage for the race if they work together, but that's something I think we'll see.
So we've talked about the technical side of Talladega. We talked a little bit about the track itself, the weather that's going to be on Sunday. Let's talk about our thoughts on who to watch, what teams to watch, and who do we think is going to emerge out of Talladega in victory lane?
I think you can't shy away from the Ford camp. I'd put my hat on any one of the SHR or Penske boys to bring it home. As much as I'd love to see Hendrick, and I think Chase has been close way too many times with the car that he's had to a really awesome finish at a restrictor plate track or super speedway, I don't think you can take the crown away from the Fords just yet. Like I said, they still have pretty much the same shape. I do believe, like what Peter brought up earlier, they are going to still have that rear end that comes basically down to the ground. I think that's just more of a safety thing than anything else. If you get bumped from a car, you don't want to be lifted by having the standard rear ends that the cars have. I think that's more just so that there's something flat to hit against. I would be pleasantly surprised if a Chevy team can win. I don't know if you're going to be able to guess which Chevy team it would come from, but if it's coming from a Ford camp, I would solidly place from SHR. I'd actually even go as far as saying that somebody like Eric Almirola could go 2 in a row in Talladega.
I'd have to agree with Anthony there. It'd be hard to sleep on Stewart Haas this week, especially with how dominant they were last fall at the same track. Again, this aero package could be this massive wild card, but I'm going to go back and talk about somebody that's flat out dominated the track since the name Earnhardt's been parking back there, is Brad Keselowski. And Brad Keselowski is off to a great start this season. Penske's been a dominant team in the Cup Series, but Brad's got that track figured out. And I think no matter what this package throws, unless he gets caught up early, you're gonna have to look for that 2 car, because that 2 car is going to be coming. He's been up front, and he's always been in the mix at Talladega. I'd say he's my one to watch. Outside of that, I'm going to go back to my pick from last week. I said Chase Elliott, somebody who's constantly qualified well within the top 10, has run up front at Talladega, who's been in the mix. I can't see them taking a step back at a super speedway track. He's aggressive. I think that he'll make the moves and try to run up front. So I have Chase with Brad up there. But another driver that I'm really looking at is somebody who I think is going to have a lot to prove regardless of the package, and that would be that 95 car of Matt DiBenedetto, someone who led the most laps in the Daytona 500 this year. has the speed and horsepower behind him, and would be very interested to see if he can replicate that success at this second visit to a super speedway.
Well, it's interesting you said that, Peter. Great minds. And I'm just going to kind of hold this up. I don't know if anybody can see that. No, probably not. What it says, BK number 2. And I would say the driver to watch is, as Peter said, is Keselowski. He is very efficient at that track. And this is how I think you're going to see this race unfold. I think the SHR cars are going to be very strong. I think through the first 2/3 of the race, the guy to watch is Bowyer. He's found some speed recently. If he doesn't have any kind of engine problem, I think you're going to see both he and Almirola have a good run. I'm not as confident yet in the 4-car. I think overall, as we spoke in our last broadcast, I think overall Kevin Harvick will emerge over the next 6 to 9 weeks. But I don't think this is the week. I would look for the Penske cars. I think you're going to hear some noise from Ryan Blaney early in the race. I think you'll see that sort of fade. You'll certainly hear noise from Logano through the whole race, maybe right up until the last few laps. But I think it's going to be Brad Keselowski that emerges victorious. I do agree that in the Chevrolet camp, we ought to be looking very closely at Chase Elliott. He is very consistent. He's put up some wonderful numbers so far this year. And he's just the Chevrolet guy that I think that can break this whole drought. Beyond that, there could be a sleeper that's out there. I know nobody wants to hear this, but I think the Fords are going to be very strong. And that might well translate to someone like Stenhouse having a good run there.
I could agree with that.
You know, you always end up in all of these races, you always end up with a sleeper, someone that, you know, you never mention in any of the talk shows, never mention in any of the fantasy groups. And, you know, come Sunday afternoon around 5:30, all of a sudden you're saying, wow, how did that happen? So, you know, you might look at someone like Stenhouse to make some noise at Talladega. And he's just the kind of guy, and I know there's a lot of Ricky Stenhouse fans out there. He's just the kind of guy that can be the instigator of the big one and emerge with nothing. You know, nothing happening to him. He'll get through it absolutely clean and take out 10 or 12 cars with him. So I think that's what we're looking at. I think it's going to be a strong day for the Ford camp. A question for both of you.
Well, before the question, I have one thing to say.
Sure.
I think the reason why, other than Denny Hamlin winning the 500 this year and in 15, I think this racetrack is a huge Achilles heel for the Gibbs camp, and it's not because of their equipment. It's because of their egos. I think they have horrible team chemistry. I think they're 4 or 3 very talented drivers that can go out there and win. Or 4. There's 4 of them. You got to remember Eric Jones is in there. He's such a quiet driver and quiet personality that you forget he's on JGR. But those 4 drivers, I think, don't mesh well. And I don't think you really ever see them work together on a plate track, except for maybe in the middle stages or back in 2015 when they were all just chilling in the back waiting to advance. But I do think it's a huge Achilles heel just because of their egos.
I'm sorry, Peter, go right ahead.
Oh, thank you, sir. I think also on my ones to watch, though, just kind of going, I guess, against that trend, but I would agree with the chemistry aspect of that, is I've been playing a little iRacing, trying to practice with this package and watching some videos of others using it as well. And it seems like it really rewards aggression. And going back to Rick's pick of Ricky Stenhouse, I think that's a solid pick. It also kind of fits the mold of a Brad Keselowski, a Chase Elliott at these type tracks, someone who's not afraid to make moves. It also throw Kyle Larson, Jimmy Johnson in there. Jimmy Johnson has not been afraid. I mean, we can look right back to the duels and the Clash race. Not been afraid to mix it up and make that risky move to try to win. But Kyle Busch, I feel like the streak's just going to continue. He's going to be there every single week until somebody can beat him. And I think that this type of package, having this extra handling underneath you, getting up on the wheel and trying to make moves, trying to force the issue, maybe getting some of that little intimidator aspect back into super speedway racing. I think he's going to be in there. And Denny seems to be, if he doesn't beat himself on pit road, Denny seems to always be in the mix this season. So I wouldn't sleep on either of those two, I'd have to say.
Yeah, I think Denny's got the most talent on the Daytona Talladega than anybody else in that camp.
So Anthony, you're going to wait for my question, and
I'm sorry.
You must have been reading my mind, because what I was going to ask the two of you is, and both of you have kind of alluded to it already, will the Joe Gibbs cars save Eric Jones sort of hang around in the back, first 2/3 of the race, say, much like we saw a couple of years ago, where, Denny Hamlin just kind of laid back, didn't do much, ran around, just ran laps. Do you see that sort of thing happening? And if so, how does NASCAR address that if it's for the entire race? I mean, they're in the playoffs. There's no question about it. They don't have to wreck a $200,000 race car this week. Your thoughts on that?
I think you're going to see two types of drivers that are going to follow what we used to see in the early 2000s, where at the beginning of the race they would fall back and wait for the big one to happen. And I think those two types are going to be A, the experienced drivers, and B, the drivers that were probably at that test at Daytona that know what to expect from this package already. I think you're going to see the guys that weren't at that test dicing up at the front, trying to see what their cars can do in the beginning part. And maybe in stage 2 or towards the end of it or in the beginning of stage 3, they'll start to calm down a little bit. But I think from the get-go, I do think you might see those Joe Gibbs guys kind of tail off to the back, cruise around a little bit, make sure they stay on the lead lap and be there for the end. But I think you're going to see more than just teams do that. You're going to see the groups of experienced drivers do that. You saw Tony Stewart, Ryan Newman used to do that all the time just because they didn't want to be involved in the wreck. You can't win if you don't have a car. And to answer your point on how does NASCAR handle something like that, they kind of I think you have to give the drivers a pass this race because it's such an unknown. You have to let the drivers and the teams feel out the package for the first time the way they want to. You don't want to force them into a corner where they have to race or they have to at least question whether or not what they're doing is legal. But at the same time, we talked about this off broadcast. I think the teams automatically have a perfect excuse as long as you see them at least try to get into the mix. Like you said, there's the 11, the 18, the 19, and a few others, the 2, the 22, are already locked into the playoffs. They have nothing to gain really by winning Talladega other than maybe bumping up an extra spot or solidifying first place like Kyle or Brad. But as long as they show towards the end of the race that they're willing to get into the mix, I don't think that's necessarily going against the 100% rule. And I don't know if the fans will really react negatively to that, because as long as there's a great finish, like you never hear anybody talk about a Talladega race and be like, hey, you remember that 1994 Die Hard 500 when between lap 80 and 92 they were like 3 wide going for the lead? You never hear anybody talk about the middle of the race. The stage racing, I think, plays best into these types of races because you can make it dicey for the end of each stage. They're going to be so close together. But I think the teams have essentially been given the perfect excuse of this is a new package. We don't know what to expect. I'm not going to send my driver out there to wreck on lap 1 or 2. We're going to hold back at the beginning, but we're going to try to win in the last 10 or 15 laps. And I think what you saw Earnhardt do in 2000 come from 10th or 15th on back. I've seen numerous simulation videos from guys that are professional iRacers that have gone from 18th to 1st in 2 laps. Mm-hmm. If they get the lanes and they get all the momentum and everything right, you can go from 18th to 1st and then from 1st all the way back to 18th in the matter of a lap and a half to 2 laps. So if they give it 100% towards the end of the race and it's not just on the last lap, I don't think NASCAR is going to say anything. But if that does happen, I think NASCAR has something to say come Daytona in July.
Yeah, I mean, I would say there's only really one driver who I think can afford to just play it safe and just be like, you know what, we're on to the following track next week. I'll come out of there unscathed, and that's Kyle Busch. He's got a 20-point cushion on second place Logano in the points. He's got more wins than anybody right now. And really to race for the stage points, to keep that car up front, to make those dicey moves and be in the danger zone, essentially. He would be the one that I would say has really nothing to lose by essentially dropping back there. Now, how NASCAR would handle it, I think the fan reaction to see a different winner would probably be more or less positive if the 18 car doesn't go to victory lane. But if the 18 car doesn't try their best, I know he does have a large fan base, and there's a lot of paying customers that come. There's a lot of people decked out in M&M's yellow or Interstate green that show up to the track and watch him coast around 38th or 40th place, or however there many are. I think that would kind of raise NASCAR to have to do something at that point, where they'd have to maybe take away a pit stall or enact some type of penalty for not going for it. But as far as everybody else, I think they're all going to be up on the wheel. I think that the owners, the teams, the sponsors, everybody knows what's at risk, and everybody knows, as we said before, how much of an equalizer this track can be, a wild card, if you want to call it that. Every point matters. Every position matters. You got to get up there. You got to get as much as you can. And especially if you're a driver with a bow tie, you got to look at this race right now, especially with the lack of speed or consistent speed that they're showing in these first 9 or so races. You got to look at this as, I got to get everything that I can. And I think that we're going to see, if not everybody, I think we're going to see a large percentage of the field going for it. Especially like Anthony said, if you can make that many moves, if the iRacing setup that I've practiced, that we've seen pros that are probably well beyond our years in iRacing practice, and they can make those moves and move all throughout the field in any given lap or two, I think that this is going to be a white knuckle, no holds barred race.
There's going to be an immense amount of underrated pressure on the spotters this weekend.
Yes, the spotters are going to be critical for this race.
Yeah.
So time to put us all on the spot. We talked about who to watch, teams to watch, the technical side of the racing. Your one and only pick. Who is going to win Talladega?
All right, I'll go first, as I love to watch when the Fox reporters do this, and they take the safe bet first, and then they kind of hang out their buddies to dry. I'm gonna go BK. I'm going 2-car. I think Brad's gonna be the one that's got something figured out. Penske's got speed. I think that he just has a way to get around that track, and I think he's gonna be the guy to watch for me. He also came on, I believe it was Dave Moody's show a couple weeks back, talking about wanting to, for a one-off event, just unrestricting these cars and letting them go and taking it out for a few laps. So he's not afraid of the speed and the aero and the danger of all of this stuff. So Brad's going to be my guy.
I'm going to go with Eric Almirola. I think he's a hungry Stewart-Haas driver. He's probably going to want to be the first one to win for the team this year, and this is the track that we know that he can do it at. So my pick's going to be that 10 car.
Well, my initial pick was already taken. That's okay. I am going to say that the driver that's going to win on Sunday is the driver that's going to create the most mayhem and get through it. And that's going to be Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I'm going to pick the unlikely candidate to get through Talladega this time. I think he's going to win that race. And the Ford camp will be happy. The Roush fans will be happy. But much of NASCAR Nation will be upset because I believe that Ricky will be the driver that initiates the big one and somehow gets through it. So I'm going with Stenhouse to win on Sunday.
Ooh. I like that pick.
I like all three picks, to be honest. If a Joe Gibbs Racing driver wins, I'm just going to be shocked. I don't know. I don't think they're going to make a lot of friends out there, and I don't think they have a lot of friends to begin with. So I don't think there's going to be anybody that wants to work with them. And I think this is the package where you need somebody to work with you. If nobody wants to work with you, I think you're going to be left out in the dust, like more so than any of the other races.
I mean, I wouldn't completely sleep on Eric Jones. He won the July Daytona race last year with a pretty beat up car. So if
but half that field was gone, and half the field that was remaining was also beat up. He did win. He went out there and won that race, but that was a pretty thin field. There was a lot of good cars out of that race.
But that's my point exactly, though. I mean, we've seen from him, as you said before, he's quiet. He kind of sneaks through and stuff like that. So in a game of attrition, if he can keep his nose clean like he is, I would say that he's got a shot. I mean, unfortunately for Truex, winning Richmond feels like forever ago. So I don't know if they're really kind of rolling into Talladega with any momentum from that previous race. But I mean, they're going to be competitive.
Can we pick a wild card?
Can we pick?
Sure.
I'd love to pick a wild card. I'm going to go with Suarez. I think this is like the racetrack where he could just surprise the heck out of all of us and just win.
Interesting pick.
I got one. This probably is, there's less of a chance of blowing up the Death Star than getting this one. But I would say Kurt Busch. I think Kurt's shown that he's got the speed. He's aggressive. He's in full send it mode. It seems like when he's racing, he's going for it. And I think if this package is going to reward those bold moves, Kurt's the kind of guy that I think can get it done. Imagine Kurt gets the bow ties into victory lane at Talladega.
Yeah, but see, I don't know if that makes him a wild card. I'm saying wild card like out of left field. You wouldn't expect it. I think Kurt's primed for his first ever Talladega win. He did it. He won at Daytona finally. He finally got his restrictor plate win. I think he's primed for a win this season, and I think Talladega is a perfect opportunity. I don't think that's a wild card, but I think that's a bold pick. But I mean like pick an out of left fielder.
Well, I think yours was.
Well, mine was, but I want to hear
Peter. See, I kind of thought my pick of Stenhouse right off the bat was kind of out of left field, but that's
it fits it though. I mean, he's got the resume.
Yeah, Stenhouse I think is a good pick, but I think it's also doubles as a nice wild card because, like I said, I think you need to have friends this race, and he did all right in the 500, but the last year's record, I still don't think a lot of guys want to be around him. And if you guys listened to the Radioactive from the 500, there was a lot of radio chatter of, I don't want to be around that 17 car. Get me away from the 17.
You know, sometimes when you're doing these kinds of broadcasts, you kind of wax poetic. I see Stenhouse is going full Michael Corleone on everybody. And as you said, you need friends. Well, you don't need friends if you eliminate all your enemies. And
yeah, pretty much. That was another point I was going to say about Santa. You can't lose if nobody else is on the track.
So Talladega is this Sunday. We're all looking forward to it. We will be doing a post-race wrap-up.
Yes.
After Sunday's race. And we'll see where our picks are. We will remind everyone of those picks. Peter went with Brad Keselowski. Anthony went with, remind me again,
Eric Almirola.
Eric Almirola, and I went with Ricky Stenhouse to win on Sunday. Earlier this week, changing topics, earlier this week there was an interesting podcast that was a full interview with NASCAR President Steve Phelps. And they were talking about more or less the state of the sport, tracks that they've considered for future racing, the upcoming changes in 2021, and then an incredibly compelling part of that interview consisted of a discussion about the NASCAR fan base and what would be the Halley's Comet of admissions by the sanctioning body, that perhaps NASCAR has not been as responsive to the traditional fan base of the sport in favor of trying to grow and culture a new type of fan. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that. And for starters, NASCAR has done a very good job of doing some things for next season, moving some races around, tracks around, etc. Most of the fan base talks a lot about wanting more short tracks, wanting some additional road course racing. Let's talk a little bit about the tracks that are currently on the schedule and tracks that we might like to see on the schedule come 2021 when all of these agreements start going away. And what tracks are going to suffer for that?
Peter, you can take that one first.
Ooh, from a schedule change, what tracks are going to suffer? I think that, especially from those comments that were said, I think you're going to see the 1.5-mile tracks are going to suffer. I think even though we've seen a lot of the tracks in the Midwestern section, pull a decent crowd, I think that it's too much of the same as far as what those tracks are. Many of them have 2 dates. Some of them have lost a date here and there, but I think that those are going to be the ones that are really getting shaken up. I want to pose a question. Do you think when they mean, they're really trying to go back to their roots essentially and bring the sport back to what it is, do you think it's just going to be for 2021 a track change or a schedule change? Or do you think that could possibly be something else as well?
I think that's also a small hint at Gen 7.
Could be.
I think what they're going to try to strongly do is really make these cars look more like street cars again. They're not going to be anywhere close to street cars, but I think that they're also hinting towards making them either race like a gens or like a stock car, or make them look more like it. There's been lots of rumors and hints that they're going to a lower profile tire. Good night. I love you. Sweet dreams.
That is NASCAR's newest fan. When you talk about growing the fan base, there it is right there.
Yeah, we got a mini Chase fan there. But no, continuing, I think that's also a hint to Gen 7 in some capacity of going away with maybe the splitter, hopefully introducing a ride height requirement. But they are also talking, like I said, about going to a thinner rubber tire to replicate more of the look of a regular street car. But I do think we're going to see more short tracks, and I think when they mean go back to our roots, I think you can definitely see the possibility of a return to Nashville by 2021. You can definitely, I believe, if NASCAR puts all their resources or as much resources as they possibly can into it, I think you can definitely see a return to the Rock in 2021. That track needs a fresh repave, maybe redo the stands, install new seats, and upgrade some electrical. I think that could definitely be done in the next 1.5 to 2 years, because NASCAR has proven that they can do things like that. the tracks that are going to suffer, I tend to agree with Rick and Peter. I think they're the 1.5s, and I think they have to be because there's so many of them that you need to take away from that kind of racing to add to the short tracks. And remember, when NASCAR first started, there was a lot more short track racing going on in the beginning of its history than there ever was to this date versus 1.5 miles. I think the biggest track before Daytona was Darlington, and they only visited tracks that size like 2 or 3 times out of the season. So my hope for the change in 2021 is a hint towards going to someplace like the Rock or Nashville as introducing the return to the roots. But I also think it's hopefully doing away with stage racing, maybe going back to its roots as far as some type of point system. This is all wish list item, but this is also what I'm trying to read into it. And some type of return to a more stock style racing car. I've said this to Peter time and time again. If you've ever watched the Australian V8 supercars, they are as close to watching a Holden SS go around a racetrack, and the way those cars bump around and have that ride height and that soft shock, I wish NASCAR kind of looked like that at some of these tracks. Go back to the days where you would see them squat into the turns, and at Martinsville, you'd see the front end 6 inches off the ground coming off the turn and then dig into the ground going into the turn. So I think those are some of the things that we're leaning towards with this new 2021. It looks like schedule change and most likely rules and package changes.
I definitely think he brings up a good point with going back to the roots with your wish list items, because that's the first thing that kind of sticks out to me when I think about that is especially going back to the comments saying that we've kind of gone against our core fan base, and we've kind of chased a different one. The thing that sticks out to me more so than the tracks itself and that schedule change is, what were the steps that NASCAR took to pursue the new fan? And for me, the first thing that sticks out is the introduction of a playoff, or the original chase format, where you tried to make the later half of the season a lot more exciting, to captivate and kind of create a playoff to keep fan interest engaged over the course of a smaller championship season, and the addition of stages, which are supposed to kind of bunch the field back up, give them a chance to race harder in the meat of the race, in the in between, for a chance to build up some championship points. I think those specific things, that's what stands out to me with those comments that the president of NASCAR has brought to the table. Where could we possibly see a return to? I don't believe we'll return to a complete full season schedule with championship points, but could we possibly see a return to a NASCAR without stage racing yet again? Perhaps shorten races with the removal of stage racing to see if they can gauge fan interest and keep the action going. I mean, I think that there's a lot that's probably on the table right now. I wish I could be a fly on the wall for those meetings, but that's the thing that stands out to me the most. But to go back, yeah, I have to stand firm with I think the 1.5 miles are going to be the tracks to suffer. Don't want to highlight or point out any specific track because I think that, based on what I've been hearing in the news outlets with SMI and ISC purchasing and trying to kind of maintain the rights to all of their tracks, and even with minority shareholders, there was something that came out with SMI today about Bruton Smith completely buying out SMI. There was something to be said where I think that NASCAR knows they can't lock down tracks for X amount of time for the long term anymore. I think they need to kind of go the route that IndyCar and Formula One go, where there's a couple rotating tracks every so often, kind of mix it up. If a playoff stays, I think that you have to see, and we see it with the 2020 schedule, there's much more emphasis on short tracks in the new 2020 playoff format for next year. I think that you're going to see the latter half of the season is going to kind of culminate everything that you did throughout the season, which your playoff and championship chase format should have been from the get-go. Should have been a smaller, I guess, sample size of all the different types of tracks you race on all throughout the year, instead of pretty much like 75% mile-and-a-half tracks.
Yeah, I think the biggest quote that you can take away from what Phelps said is what he said is, we tried to mix up the schedule as much as we could with the limitations that we had.
Yeah.
We had 5-year agreements. 2020 is the last year of those agreements. And then, like Peter said, the cutoff races are Bristol Motor Speedway, Martinsville, and the Roval for 2020. I think you're going to see a huge shakeup in 2021.
It's interesting. We've talked about the tracks, and we talked a little bit about them in our last broadcast in the frame of reference of attendance, lack of attendance, larger venues, etc. NASCAR actually suffered from the same phenomenon that Major League Baseball did from about the mid-1960s through the 1970s. When baseball first started building new stadiums, we talked about the attendance in our last broadcast, but when they started building new stadiums, they started with Busch Stadium, the old Busch Stadium in St. Louis, and then in the very early 70s, unveiled Riverfront in Cincinnati, Three Rivers in Pittsburgh, the ballpark in Kansas City. I know I'm missing some, and they were all more or less configured the same way. They had the same dimensions. They had approximately the same seating. Does that sound familiar? Sounds like our 1.5 miles that have dominated the NASCAR scene for the past decade or so. Baseball found out over a period of about 20 years that nobody wanted those stadiums anymore. They did not want, 320 feet to left, 380 in the power alleys, 410 to center, and 320 down the right field line. They didn't want that. They wanted a different type of look in each ballpark. And I think that's exactly what NASCAR is going through right now. Is, they don't want to close their eyes and guess whether it's Texas or Atlanta or Vegas. They just want to go to places like Bristol, Martinsville, Darlington, Daytona, Talladega. I think what's going to happen, and this is a question for the two of you, I think what you're going to see is, in keeping with the vein of return to their roots, I think you're going to see a renaissance of tracks like Daytona, Charlotte, Talladega, Martinsville, maybe to a degree Darlington, and Bristol. That's what I'm calling the heart of NASCAR, the places with the really rich history. I think the days of rewarding 2 races to tracks that aren't part of that rich history are going to end. I don't think you're going to see us going to places like Texas or Vegas or Pocono or, any Michigan. I don't think you're going to see us go to places like that twice a year. I actually think you're going to see a morphing toward once a year and actually having more tracks on the schedule that embrace that kind of historic way of looking at NASCAR. What I'm really surprised at is that no one has come up with the brilliant marketing scheme of building an old school track. Because you could have all of the modern amenities, again, channeling what baseball's done, all of the modern amenities in an old school look track. I'm amazed that nobody has done that. Thoughts on that, guys, as far as, are we going to see 2 races at Dover, 2 races at Pocono in the future?
I don't think so. I think it is going to change. Like you said, you're going to see the heart of NASCAR, those tracks. I don't think you're going to see die away. Like you said, Martinsville, Richmond, Darlington, Daytona, Talladega. I think you see those tracks stick around and keep their races for a long time to come, because those, with the exception of Bristol this year, they do draw really nice size numbers. I think it would be awesome to see a new developer come in and create a reconfigured style Martinsville. Maybe a Martinsville that's shaped like Indy would be kind of cool, where you have to double apex, but you have that little inside kink where you can maybe cheat a little bit and get under somebody, or you create Bristol with the banking that it originally had, but make it concrete and change it up from what you would get from a regular Dover. I saw a really cool video on Facebook from, must have been the 1920s or 30s. It was little, like, almost IndyCar looking race cars racing on a velodrome. It was a wooden bicycle track, and it looked like they were racing at Bristol with the banking of the tracks, but the tracks were a 70-degree radius, and they were 40-foot straights, or it was a 70-foot radius or diameter turn, and it was a 40-foot straightaway. So the track would level out and immediately go right back into the banking, and it was like a 40-degree banking, and it was like some of the coolest racing I had ever seen, even though there was no sound, black and white, and it was at like 5 frames a second, but it just looked awesome, and that would be a really cool track. But I think you'll see more reaction from somebody buying a track like Rockingham, something that has that reputation, has that instant nostalgia feel, and just bringing that track back to what it once was. That track doesn't need a huge TV screen on the backstretch as one of its main attractions, kind of like what they did with Charlotte and what they did with Bristol, adding that huge suspended viewing screen. That track just needs a repave, new seats, and you will sell that track out for quite a few years. Same thing with Nashville. You need to go back to the tracks that have the reputation and back to the tracks that got you to where you were and where you are now. And I think that can elevate NASCAR more than somebody coming in and building a Martinsville 2.0 or a track that's similar to the Rock. Because if somebody comes in and builds a track that's similar to Rockingham, people are going to say, well, why didn't you just go back to Rockingham? You had the track. You could have fixed that track. Or you could have opened up Gateway again. You could have gone back to Gateway if you build a track that looks like Gateway. Or like the way that I look at Gateway is it's a flat Darlington. 2 different circumference or 2 different radius turns, and it's flat. And it looks just like Darlington from above. So I think you're more beneficial to go back to the tracks that existed, that are salvageable, and fixing those tracks and drawing the crowds back to those venues than you are in building a whole new track and saying, well, yeah, we built this based off of Rockingham. I'm just going to keep saying Rockingham because my dream is to go back to Rockingham. If you build it like that, like look at like how you said about the baseball fields in the 70s, they were all built the same. Look at where the Mets play at Citi Field and where the Phillies play right now. If you watch that baseball game, sometimes you can't tell which team is home because the backdrops behind the batters are exactly the same. And if you really look at the seating of like the Phillies and the Mets, for instance, the stadiums on the inside, the layouts almost look the same except for the outfield walls. And then obviously the outside of the stadiums. But the inside seating areas almost look identical, plus or minus 2 additional features to commemorate Philadelphia and 1 to commemorate New York.
Peter, thoughts on the tracks?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the simple solution, I guess, would be, as Anthony put it, to try to find newer tracks that are already in existence that you can probably house NASCAR in there very quickly. Maybe it's just a safer barrier update or a possible way to really figure out, is there a way to put the haulers, if they can't fit in the infield of some of these shorter tracks that could be in consideration? Is there a way that we can create maybe some kind of new experience and avenue that can transport the cars in and out in a very efficient fashion? 4 tracks really come to mind as far as just thinking about places that they can go. And number one is, just like Anthony, is Rockingham. I think Rockingham, I was driving back from Pennsylvania this holiday weekend and just flipping through the satellite radio, and I was on a rock and roll station. They were talking about a rock concert at the Rock. And I got so excited. I was like, oh man, I remember reading about this. They're trying to get events to appear at Rockingham Speedway, build some revenue. You know, they've been showing up to different racetracks. I believe like some of their officials were at Martinsville. They've been posted on social media. There's a lot of momentum towards that track possibly returning to the circuit. So I think that would be one of those that fits the bill. You know, return to your roots and go in that heartland of of NASCAR America, as we call it. So I think that would definitely be one. Another, if we're going to take away a date from a track, if we're in agreement, I believe all three of us are, that we're no longer going to see two race dates at specific speedways or raceways. I think that if you look at Michigan, you take one away from that portion of the country. You got to look at a track that's still in existence that could house NASCAR, and that's the Milwaukee Mile. Talk about something unique. A mile in configuration, flat track. All right, Loudon's got some characteristics to it, but again, Milwaukee offers something that's completely different. And it still gives that area of the country an opportunity to go. One of my fantasy tracks, but it would be way too small to house NASCAR. They'd have to figure out a way to keep the haulers and everything to work. Would be if you're going to remove something from the West Coast and say maybe Phoenix or Las Vegas, if you're going to take something away or possibly rotate out California, I would look at Irwindale. Irwindale is a very short track with a lot of rich history and puts on great shows with Formula Drift, but the track is just so small. But it's got an abrasive surface. Late models love it. That would be a really, really cool experience to see. But then you got to kind of look and see, is there anything worth like salvaging? Now, my true dream would be exactly what Rick said. Can we possibly make a new old track? Can we bring something essentially back to life someplace else that's the exact same way, just with modern amenities? I would love to see a return to North Wilkesboro, even if it wasn't specifically there. If they could somehow find a way to bring back that track, that would be really awesome. I know that current track in its state and where it is and all that stuff, there's no revitalizing. There's no plan to revitalize that. But to try to find a track that's similar in shape, size, and could possibly be in a good spot would be awesome. I think my last one that I was going to mention of my 4 would be Iowa. I think Iowa is going to take a Kansas or Chicagoland date. Everyone's been kind of saying that Iowa is the next track to kind of appear. I think they're ready for it. They're primed for it. The dirt track drivers like Larson and Stenhouse, they seem to really like that course. And again, the Midwest, they as much as those tracks get knocked for their shape and configuration, the Midwest packs in NASCAR fans. There's a lot of passionate people out there that absolutely love the sport. And if they can make it to a track like Iowa, I think that would be a home run for NASCAR.
Yep.
It's interesting you mention, regionally the Midwest and the tremendous support that there is in that part of the country for local short tracks. And I'm going to pose a question to you guys. For those that don't know, this show originates in the northeastern United States, primarily in the metropolitan New York area. Is there enough interest in the media capital of the country, and it's some 20 million people within 2 hours? And I know there was talk about this years ago and it fell apart for a lot of different reasons. Is there, do you think, a desire to build something that is north of Dover, east of Pocono, and south of Loudoun to service this market?
I don't think so. I think we saw that ship sail about 15 years ago, when they were proposing a track in Staten Island, and it just didn't. It never gained any political backing. I think just in the area that we live in, we know the type of politicians that are in our area. A NASCAR track is like their worst nightmare and over their dead body kind of scenario. From a personal standpoint, I would love to have a track that's only an hour away that I don't have to get a hotel room to stay at, but I don't see it happening anytime soon. I think NASCAR needs to focus on where it came from, and if I guarantee you right now, if they brought a place back like Rockingham, I'd have no problem going down to see those races.
I would I tend to agree as far as like erecting a track and building one in this area. Also, just thinking about the amount of traffic and why we don't even have our major football teams here. I think if it had to be somewhere in this region, it would have to kind of be where the Jets and Giants are, where you kind of utilize the Meadowlands or a place inside of Jersey that's not too far that everybody can travel to within that hour, 2 hour frame that you guys mentioned before. I think that's kind of what you look at. It was a home run for a short period of time in, I believe, the 80s. IndyCar, and at the time it was called like the Kart World Series. They had raced the Meadowlands Sports Complex. It was a semi-street course. It was fantastic. It was really cool, and it's something that I wish that would kind of continue because I would have loved to have seen that. But also with Formula E coming to Red Hook, Brooklyn, the last few years, it's actually been a very positive and warm and receptive event. I haven't been able to go in attendance, but I've been able to see from social media postings and from watching, play by play, that they do get a decent turnout. I think the home run for NASCAR or motorsports in general in this region would be, we have one of the biggest auto shows in the world. It's actually going on this week right now at the Javits Center in Manhattan. I know Toyota does a great job with always putting a demo car and display for kids and adults to take pictures with, but I think that you gotta kind of showcase the brand, get people interested without the race aspect of it. Maybe have like a NASCAR car show. I know several drivers, and Jimmy's one that comes right to mind. They've unveiled new cars in Manhattan at Times Square, and people come and check it out. And it doesn't seem like there's paid spectators. It seems like just general people who were there for the show are interested and excited at this, and they may give NASCAR a certain look. I think that it's a very quiet fan base in the region in which Anthony and myself live in. If I go a little bit further past my house and deeper into Long Island, there is a much stronger motorsports community out there than I would say in the city. But they're all struggling too. They're fighting for a racetrack. They know it's very tough to get a racetrack built, even just a drag strip built out here. And there's many groups trying to get one built in Long Island, and they're always looking for a place to go. It would be awesome to see that, but then I think back to Pocono, and three of us, we all migrate there for the summer. That's been a race that, from what I can remember, has always had a great turnout because it kind of is just like right in almost that kind of heartland section of. It can appeal to New Yorkers. It can appeal to it can appeal to people from Connecticut. It can appeal to people locals from Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware as well. So I don't know. I don't know about building a track here, but yeah, I mean, I wish there would be something that we can do to kind of promote the brand here much better.
One word to sum up the support that motorsports would get from a political standpoint to be able to get a track here: Englishtown.
Yeah.
It was a drag strip that hosted the NHRA Summer Nationals for years. All of a sudden, people started building houses a little too close to a drag strip. They were notified when they were building their houses, hey, you're within a quarter mile of a drag strip or a half mile from a drag strip. Englishtown is now closed, one of the most historic drag strips, because the citizens complained about the noise. And I think that's a precedent that a lot of politicians are going to lean on.
That's interesting because, I was going to ask about a venue that's a whole lot closer to you two than it is to me. But you hear an awful lot about it. Tremendous success out there on a local level is Riverhead.
Mm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
everything I've ever heard about that place is just a wonderful place to go and watch a race, and it's always crowded and it's always lively, and you'd think that, you know, within a pretty clean shot of, you know, again, some 20 million people, that would be the example, the positive example that you would look to.
The community that goes to Riverhead, not the community itself of Riverhead, but the racing community that goes to Riverhead is the only reason why Riverhead is still standing, I think. There's a lot of want and talk from, again, politics and developers that want that track shut down. It's on prime land. Uh, it's not struggling to keep its doors open, but there's a documentary about that track. I forgot what the name of it was. Peter might be able to back me up or help me out here. But it's basically about how that track we could see go away in the very near future. There's a lot of political opposition. It's not near any major residential developments, and the that track does provide awesome racing. Me and Peter went there last year. It's a great short track. It's a great place to go to. It's just that track is unfortunately a stone's throw away from succumbing to the political pressures that it's seeing. Very similar to Englishtown. It's seeing a lot of pressure from people that are starting to build closer to that track, that are saying that the races are too loud. They don't like the fumes that the cars are putting off, and politicians are more willing to say yes to those people because they're going to basically get that vote in the future if that's what happens. And Riverhead is a track I'm very scared of that we might lose in the next 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. And just to kind of respond to that, if anyone ever gets a chance, if you're looking for a great documentary to watch, it's called The Last Race, I believe. I think it was featured or promoted at Sundance last year.
Yes.
So
it was one of the headlines.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect. So it got a lot of notoriety that way. It was talking about the trials and tribulations of, kind of surviving, being a little short track, kind of going against the local politicians and the local residents that may not be into it. And I think a lot of that, what scares me the most is a lot of that has to do with the upcoming generation. As generations kind of develop, and we've spoke about this last time, the interest in motorsports and cars has kind of dwindled, and that scares me. Where, is there going to be a continuation to keep people returning to a type of track like that, or even NASCAR in general? What scares me is, if you look at that area, there's all outlets and shops and whatnot that you find anywhere else, all within that range, and the track is right next to it. And it just seems like a tale of two different cities. Like, you go to the track and you see your blue collar, roll it up to either a dirt track or just just a short asphalt oval, fan base that people who are probably working on their own cars and and loving it every minute. And then you go and look right next door, and it's more white collar, looking for shops and experiences, and pretty much that way out Long Island mentality. So it's scary that it exists that way, but it's really all we got left. And they have a great fan base that supports the track. I can firmly say that myself and Anthony and even my fiance, and some of our best friends, and some locals that live much closer, we'll frequent it. We'll try to go to a couple of races every summer. So it's surviving. It's just a shame that there's nothing that can kind of bring that to the next level. They can't bring a higher level stock car series there because the track is small and the infrastructure isn't quite there. But as long as people are interested, I guess people will return. That's really what it comes down to.
And that raises our last point of discussion for tonight, and that is the commentary made by by NASCAR President Steve Phelps regarding the fact that in some ways NASCAR had drifted away from its traditional fan base and tried to secure new fans to the detriment of that old fan base. And we talk about this a lot in terms of, and this is a perfect segue into it, that maybe NASCAR really needs to take a look at its core fan. Its core fan, I think, consists of primarily the southeastern United States population, with pockets of very devoted motorheads around the country. People like us, people that attend the various short tracks in the Midwest. When you head out to the far west and you get to places like Los Angeles, there are just so many things to do in Southern California. Auto racing is probably way down on the depth chart. So let's talk for a moment about how we feel about the commentary of returning to the core fan, and how this could represent a revitalization of the sport in the region that is admittedly been somewhat shunned away from the sport over the past decade or so.
I mean, there's a couple of things that stand out to me to try to get back to that. And I know NASCAR's made strides with creating fan councils and, talking to the owners and the drivers and pretty much getting everybody involved to really, I guess, try to get a pulse on what did they go away from? What do we got to get back to? I wish I had a complete and utter idea or understanding of what it exactly was to make it much easier to solve. But one of the things I think too, that could potentially work, or kind of bring those early phases back before getting into all the different makings of NASCAR, is something that JTG Dougherty Racing is doing with their sponsorship. The 37 and 47 card are promoting different brands throughout different moments throughout the season. They're promoting barbecue and outdoors picnic products as the weather's getting warmer towards summer, when you'd be using those products more. And then, for the fall, they'll have different things lined up for when you're trying to get together with family. And I think that's an ultimate idea. I think if we're going to try to appeal to that Southeast region, NASCAR's got to really feel that what is quintessentially the Southeast, what is something that really works. And I think this return to Nashville kind of strikes at that. I think that NASCAR is going to embrace their Southern and country roots. I think regardless of the status of the current track, I think moving the finale there kind of brings that idea and that kind of culture, if you want to call it that culture back to the sport. You're putting the finale, the culmination of everything that happened throughout the year, in essentially the heartbeat of NASCAR. I mean, I know Anthony and I have talked about it before, about wishing that it was in Charlotte, but I think that this is an awesome move. I got my eye on the NFL draft tomorrow night, for personal reasons, hoping the Jets draft well. But I'm looking to see, because this is the first time they will be at Nashville, how does that city embrace the NFL? How does the NFL embrace the country roots of that city? And to kind of see how and what NASCAR will do differently, to see how that's going to work out for NASCAR. So I think embracing the country roots. There's another thing that I think of as well. College football is huge in the South. I can think back to the times that I visited down there. I'd see more so than your local sports teams. You'd see more the local colleges displayed all throughout people's tailgates, houses, even hotels. When we were down in Myrtle Beach, people would drape their college sports flags as college football was starting out that week. I wonder if NASCAR can kind of cross promote with college football in such a way, because that's something that the South really, really cares about and gets into. And that's something that starts as our season's starting to taper off. I know that they've had a bowl game at Bristol Motor Speedway but maybe there's something else that they can do. But you got to try to embrace what I said before, quintessentially, what is the South, and try to make it seem like we're coming back home to that, and try to embrace it. For me, as an outsider, from someone from Long Island, New York, I'm the furthest thing from that. So I wouldn't be able to really kind of understand it, but I think that NASCAR knows where they're from, and I think that they can really kind of figure that out. And that also has to harken to Daytona as well. To try to utilize Daytona instead of just that World Center Super Bowl-esque event. There's got to be kind of this returning to the roots. Not saying race on the sand, but to kind of bring back some of the history. I think that would be really cool.
Anthony?
I agree with the idea that they need to refocus on the region that got them big. I have no problem with NASCAR saying we're gonna focus in this area of the country and rebuild our sport, or I guess you can kind of call it a rebuild the way that I'm looking at it, because they're going through a lot of changes all at once. So I think they're trying to rebuild their reputation, rebuild their footing on motorsports, and tell the fans like, hey, don't worry, we know we messed up, but we're here to stay. We're here to fix it. I don't know so much if a crossover platform with working with a different sport to try to promote or cross promote the two would work entirely too well. But then again, any kind of advertising you can get from anywhere probably and most likely won't hurt you. I just don't see how the two can work in perfect harmony. You have college football that plays on Saturdays, which means that Xfinity races in the South probably are not getting watched towards the end of the season. I wouldn't be surprised if the only Xfinity race people watch towards the end of the season is Homestead, just because it's the last race in the championship race. I think that NASCAR, and I like what Peter pointed out with how JTG is doing their sponsorship model for this year and for the future. It seems where they're picking certain categories of sponsorship and focusing on that depending on what time of year it is in the season. I think we're going to see something like that announced towards the end of this year. As far as with NASCAR, they're changing their sponsorship scheme. I think that could be greatly beneficial to them in the way that they promote their sport. It gives them more of an opportunity to get out there. I really do think they dropped the ball on the Monster sponsorship. They didn't. I think they could have pushed their product and their merchandise so much further than they did in the last 2 seasons or 3 seasons, including this year. Than they even did with Sprint. Sprint, they were out there. They were everywhere. They were pushing cell phones. They were pushing everything that you could think of under the sun. With Monster, you didn't even see a Monster Energy can with a NASCAR driver on it, but yet any 7-Eleven and CVS or Dwayne Reed you walk into, you see one with a can, no matter where you are, with a big picture of Gronkowski on it. So I think NASCAR needs to refocus on how it promotes with its sponsors to get those fans to watch the races, to get to the races. But I have no problem with NASCAR focusing on replanting its roots where it made its name in the Southeast at tracks like, again, we're going to sound repetitive this broadcast, but Rockingham, Nashville, Iowa, any type of fairgrounds that you've been to. I want to see the fan base there grow, because as long as the fan base there grows, that's all that NASCAR needs. And then everybody else will follow. They need to replant a strong base there and then build off of it and branch back out like they did in the early 2000s.
It's interesting. Many times life imitates art, and I think this is a case where art is imitating life. I liken NASCAR to being that kid who went away to college, became massively successful and educated, got the dream job, made money beyond his imagination, and then started to feel the pangs of the loss of home. And sometimes you have to take a step back and remember where you've been before you lose all of it. And I think that's where NASCAR is. I think NASCAR made great strides this week in first talking about a return to some of its core types of racing, and now in an admission that is rare for this sport, returning to address the needs of its core fan base, and that's a good thing for all of us. I'm looking at the clock on the wall, and I'm looking up and seeing that the Carolina Hurricanes just tied up Washington with about 14 minutes left in the third period. So,
Nice. Let's go Canes.
So we've got some exciting things coming up on this channel. The first, obviously, we talked about is the wrap-up show after Talladega. But next Monday night, we have a very special presentation. Hopefully, we're still going to go through with our plans to do that.
Absolutely.
April 29th is a date that the hardcore fan of NASCAR should know what that date means. For the new fan, and we hope we're getting lots and lots and lots of new fans here on our channel, that is the day that commemorates Dale Earnhardt Sr.'s birthday. And we have a special broadcast that evening to kind of talk about the 3-car, to talk about the driver, to talk about the man, and to daydream a bit about what life might be like had February 18th, 2001 not happened. So we do want our fans, new and old, to tune in for that broadcast. We've got some interesting and lively discussion, as always, here on 3 Wide. Trying to think. We've got a lot of great stuff coming up. We've talked briefly about doing a NASCAR 101 for our new fans. We could probably do that as a midweek broadcast to appeal to new fans. We're obviously going to do our part because we are one big family here in NASCAR Nation. And we want to thank the folks at Chase Elliott Nation for being loyal followers of 3 Wide. We do appreciate your participation. And Anthony, before we go, tell our viewers a little bit about how they might be more active with this station.
All right. Like always, it's the same deal as it always has been. If you come across our channel and you like the content that we're putting out and want to continue to follow, just go on below the video screen and press the subscribe button. And the most important thing you can do after that is to press the bell icon. That will let you know exactly when we schedule a live broadcast, or when we go live. You'll get a notification to your mobile device or to your laptop, letting you know and sending you a direct link to our videos. The biggest thing that we can ask for you is your feedback and your constructive criticism as well, to let us know what you think we can improve upon. Like we say a lot on this broadcast, we still have the rookie stripes on our computers. Any type of helpful, constructive criticism would be greatly appreciated. But the biggest thing you can do for us is hit that subscribe button and click that bell icon.
Peter, before we go, we wanted to thank you for your contributions. You had one additional thing you'd like to add in before we say goodbye to our loyal followers and to all of NASCAR Nation this evening.
Yes, absolutely. Actually, as you said before, we're all one big family, and I'm looking forward to talking about the the big man himself, Dale Earnhardt Sr. But NASCAR, we are a huge family. We're mourning the loss of Dale Jr.'s mom, Brenda Jackson, this past weekend. So just our hearts and prayers are out to Junior and the rest of the NASCAR community. We all band together and hope that she's in a much better place right now watching all the racing.
That is a great point. We should have mentioned that earlier, and thank you for raising that. It's interesting, the names that come up that contribute to this sport behind the scenes. And Brenda Jackson obviously was integral, because without her, we wouldn't have Dale Jr. or Kelly. And Kelly's got a couple of kids that you could be seeing in a car very, very soon. So
Absolutely.
our hearts and prayers do go out to the Earnhardt family for their loss. So, Anthony, it is time to look up into above where the media folk are, that spotters stand. Peter, thank you for joining us this evening. We look forward to seeing you Sunday night. Enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank
Anthony,
you.
enjoy the rest of yours.
Thank you.
And remember, until that spotter tells you that you are clear,
You're 3 wide.
3 wide. Good night, everybody.
Good night.